Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about 3 words that you'll encounter often in your immersion, and they have quite a wide meaning spectrum, and that means that dictionaries can't really cover the full range of what they mean, especially when, as they often are, they're used in very colloquial ways. Then I'd like to thank all the people who tell me which words give them trouble in immersion. This helps me to know what to cover and in what order to cover it. A lot of people wanted to know about Nante and Nanka. So if you have words that are giving you trouble, please pop them in the comments below. It's very helpful to know what it is that's causing problems. So the 3 words are Nado, Nante, and Nanka. They have different meanings, but they overlap in certain areas. And the simplest one is Nado, so we're going to start off with that. Nado essentially means pretty much what etc. means in English, but the thing to bear in mind in formal language is that it has higher status than etc. in English. In English, etc. tends to be treated in many cases as a bit of a cop-out. It's a way of not really saying exactly what you mean. In Japanese, it has much higher status. Its meaning spectrum is broader. You will encounter it both in completely formal writing and in informal conversation and writing. It's an indispensable part of the language. To give an example of its formal use, a dictionary definition of the word chaso, and chaso is one of these words that I've talked about in a previous video. 2 or more kanji words that really aren't words in quite the English sense of the word. That's to say, they are really phrases. They bring together 2 known entities, which are known if we've done much Japanese, into what in English would simply be a phrase. So we can throw these words into our Anki if we want to remind ourselves that they exist, but we shouldn't treat them as completely new entities. They're really just like phrases, and this one is very close to the English phrase car window, which then the word, it's just a phrase. If we know car and we know window, we know what a car window is. So if we know kuruma, and we know mado, and we know the on-readings of the 2, which are sha and so, then chaso really presents no problems, except that we need to remember that sha, the on-reading of kuruma, refers to a broader range of vehicle. Kuruma usually simply means a jidosha, an automobile. While sha can refer to any kind of surface vehicle. A bicycle is a jitensha, a train is a densha, etc. And the definition is jidosha nado no mado. So essentially that means the window of an automobile, etc., which in this case means any kind of a surface vehicle that has windows, so not a jitensha, but a densha, etc., the window of a vehicle. And this nado is a very typical use of the word. It gets used freely in formal and informal Japanese. In informal Japanese, nado also has another use which overlaps with the other 2 words we're going to look at. It can be used to mildly denigrate or belittle a word that it's attached to. Now, denigrate and belittle are not exactly the right words to use here, but I don't think there are quite the right words in English. It throws a negative light. But in the case of nado, is usually making light of or slightly rejecting whatever it is. So we might say, tobacco nado fuyoda, which means I've no use for cigarettes. Now, tobacco wa fuyoda would mean the same thing essentially. Notice that nado knocks out other particles. The only difference here is that nado is throwing that slightly disparaging light on cigarettes. But the way we could read it is something like, in English, I don't need stuff like cigarettes. Now, actually, this doesn't mean that literally. It's not saying I don't need cigarettes or cigars or a pipe or a hookah. It means I don't need that kind of thing. That's something I don't need in my life. And then they say this use overlaps with our other two words. Both Nanka and Nante can be used in this Sreya negative light on the noun they follow. Why? The strongest and most colloquial of the three is Nanka, and Nante comes somewhere in the middle. So, Nanka is really a contraction of Nanika, something, but it has quite a few colloquial uses, and is denigrating one we'll hear sometimes very strongly in cases where, well, let's say in an anime, a younger sister is angry with her older sister. She may say, "One-chan nanka daikirai!" I really hate stuff like my big sister. Now, of course, that's not literally what she means. She doesn't mean she hates stuff like her big sister, but by using this expression, stuff like you, stuff like my big sister, you're throwing a very disparaging light on what it is you're talking about. It can be milder. We can say, "Sakka nanka tomi ga nai." I have no interest in stuff like soccer. I'm not interested in soccer. And it can be more mildly belittling still. We might say, "Ami nanka heiki da." And what we're saying there is, rain doesn't bother me. I'm not troubled by rain. I'm okay with rain. And the Nanka is just throwing that slightly diminishing light on the rain, indicating how little we're worried about it. And it often gets used of oneself, as in watashi nanka. And this is often used as stress, a perceived inferior position, or a difficult position that one finds oneself in. For example, watashi nanka marude kodomo atsukai da. I'm treated just like a child. Now, the fundamental meaning of Nanka, as I said, is actually a contraction of Nanika, which is something. And it can be used simply as a contraction of Nanika, in, for example, Nanka shimpai wa aru, which just means Nanika shimpai wa aru, or is there some worry? Is anything worrying you? Now, from there, it goes on to previous things in order, as with something or somewhat in English, to make them a bit vaguer. So we might say Nanka chiga, something's different. Not sure what it is, but something's different. Nanka chiga. Now from that it goes on to meaning somehow. So we might say Nanka suki janai. Somehow I don't like it. For some reason I don't like it. Nanka suki janai. Now from there it gets worse. It goes on to become even vaguer. So in very casual, and I would say rather sloppy speech, you can hear Nanka at the beginning of a sentence and then several times during the sentence, Nanka this, Nanka that. And when it's being used like that, it's really being used like kinda or like in English. And just as in English, this is a sloppy way of talking. It's not good Japanese. But you may hear people talking like this in some anime, etc. The function really, as with like or kinda in English, is simply vaguing things up a bit and releasing oneself from the need to express oneself precisely, just kinda saying like whatever it is that kinda comes into your mind, like Nanka, Nanka, Nanka. So we should look up for this very loose use of Nanka and realize that it doesn't really mean very much at all. Nante is essentially a contraction of Nante. And I've done another video about this te, which is a contraction of to, boy, to, you. And it's the same with Nante. So in its simplest and most basic use, it's used, for example, in saying Nante itta, which means, what did you say? English speakers may be tempted to ask, Nani wo itta, what did you say? But that's not natural Japanese. You can say nanto itta, but it's actually more natural in casual speech to say nante itta. What was it that you said? Which isn't really easy to translate into English because it's using that quotation particle, even though it's rather morphed itself into nante in colloquial speech. Now you'll also see it a lot with the meaning of what in English, as used in expressions like, what a nice day, what a stupid person, what a beautiful flower, etc. And this is an abbreviation of nantoyu, but it's more often than not, even in not particularly casual speech, used as Nante. Nante will squishy keshkita. Well, beautiful scenery. And just as in English, this Nante can be used to introduce any fairly strong reaction to anything. It can be negative, it can be positive. We say what a this or what a that. Now it's also used, as we said before, in this beginning manner attached to the noun. So, for example, we can say shiken nante kiraida. I hate exams. Okane nante iranai. I don't want money. The like nanka, it both stresses the noun that it follows and indicates a negative or dismissive attitude towards it. And it can also be used at the end of a complete statement to express surprise. So in this sense, it's rather like the first one we looked at, the what are this or what are that, which comes at the beginning. It can also be used at the end to express surprise or in some cases disbelief or doubt. So we might say, Fuyani, tsubame o miru nante, see a swallow in winter, nante. And with that Nante doing that, it's turning the whole thing into an expression, rather like the what are this or what are that expressions. So what we're saying is something like, gosh, imagine seeing a swallow in winter. And this use of Nante on the end after the engine of a statement can be used as part of a longer sentence. So, for example, we could say, Hara o tataru nante. Now, hara utateru means literally stand your stomach, but this is an expression meaning get angry. So the whole thing is saying, getting angry, that's not like you. And I've talked about this rashi and rashi kunai in another video, so if you're not familiar with those, I'll put a link above my head and in the information section below. Now we can take out the nante here, and then of course we'd have to put in a particle. Let's say, hara otateru no wa to inashiku nai. And the nante is expressing her surprise about this because it's not like the person concerned. And note that this can't be the belittling nante which attaches to nouns. This is attaching to a complete statement. So we're expressing our surprise about someone being angry and then adding a comment that is not like her. And finally, we can use it in a way that comes right back more or less to the original meaning of toyu, but adding a bit of vagueness to it. So, if we say, Yamada nante hito wa shiranai, we're saying, I don't know anyone called Yamada. Now, the nante here could be replaced simply with toyu. Yamada toyu hito wa shiranai. So what's the difference between using the regular toyu and using nante? Well, Yamada toyu hito wa shiranai. It is like saying in English simply, I don't know a person called Yamada. But Yamada nante hito wa shiranai is more like saying, I don't know any character called Yamada. It's throwing a lot more doubt and questioning into the whole thing. So we've covered the main usages of these three words or expressions here. It's not completely exhaustive, but I think it gives you the basic keys to how they work, what they mean, how they're used. If you have other usages of these words that trouble you, please mention it in the comments below and I'll respond. And if you have other questions or comments, of course, please put them in the comments below as usual. I'd like to thank my Gold Koteshi patrons, my producer angels, who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. I feel really privileged to be doing on this exciting adventure into what I consider to be the most beautiful and most logical language in the world, together with all of you. So, thank you so much, and thank you for attending this lesson. Korekara mo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Class dismissed.